candidates for the State Board of Education in District 15, which encompasses Washington and Iron counties. I'm Jay Evenson of the Deseret News, and I will be your moderator this evening. Before we begin, I would like to recognize and thank our sponsors, which are the Hinckley Institute of Politics, KSL, the Sutherland Institute, the Utah Association of Charter Schools, and United Way. We apologize that we're getting started a little bit late this evening. We had some technical difficulties. Our candidates for District 15 are Scott Smith and Kristen Norton. Kristen Norton declined our invitations to participate this evening. I should note that she told us she was declining because she does not like how her opponent has characterized her as representing special interests. This is not the first time that we have had such a forum with only one candidate. Our goal is to provide a platform to help voters make informed decisions as an important election looms. I met with Mr. Smith prior to the debate this evening and went over some ground rules. This debate is, of course, different from those in previous years because it's being held during the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, we are each in separate locations. And although we have just one candidate this evening, we feel it's important to stick to our rules. Mr. Smith will be given 90 seconds initially for an opening statement, after which I will pose a series of questions to him, giving him 60 seconds in which to respond to each. After I have asked several questions, I will open up the questioning to members of our viewing audience who may at any time submit these questions via YouTube. Should we not receive any questions from the audience, I have a few extra questions to pose of my own. At the end of our session tonight, we will grant Mr. Smith 90 seconds for a closing statement. Those are our rules. They're pretty simple. Now, Mr. Smith, we'd like you to begin your 90-second opening statement.
Thank you, and thank you all, the sponsors, as well as Jay, for willing to moderate this. I'm appreciative of the opportunity I have to tell my views. I think I'd like to be able to discuss why my opponent isn't here, but maybe that will be a question later on that will be asked, and I can go into that question at that point. So I remember 4 years ago when I ran, I thought I was a reformer. I thought I was prepared to reform. And when I came to this debate, I realized I didn't understand what that meant. Now, 4 years later, I realized I also stand on the backs of many, Eric and Michelle Smith and Kim Franks and Julie Adamick and Brian Allen and some of the legislators like Greg Hughes and Senator Stevenson that worked in the chair, as well as individuals from the governor's office. They have all worked to do reform in Utah, but it stopped. What I am enthusiastic about right now is true reform. If there wasn't a problem with education, not only in Utah, but in the state, in the country, I say just continue on the way we are, but there is a drastic issue in education. And I truly want to give my best efforts towards that opportunity to reform education in Utah.
Thank you. Since you mentioned it, it is kind of the elephant in the room here, or the elephant on the internet, why your opponent is not here. I would like you to address that if you could.
Sure, Jay. So back after I won convention, I had sent an email out just to individuals saying, I'm gonna need support. I had been contacted by and told by teachers that go to our business, they were asked to support my opponent. I didn't think this was anything that was earth-shattering, was a surprise, and I would expect that. I understand Ms. Norton is a very sweet person, a very nice person, does a very good job, and I was not trying to attack her. So my email said specifically, this is the only line that I've ever said about her. This is the first time I've talked about her, was I need assistance because my opponent has support from special interest group. I never said money. I just know that if I worked as a teacher, a member of the UEA, a member of the PTA for 24 years, I would expect somebody would support her because I understand she's a very good teacher. And I didn't mean any malice. I reached out to her, texting her, asking that, could we talk? And I had not received a response. So we are where we are at this point. I've not talked about her campaign. Again, I understand she's very sweet. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. I'd like, if we could, to ask a couple of questions concerning the coronavirus pandemic. As you know, it's taken its toll on education budgets. And I don't think we have an exact idea right now of how much or what we're talking about. But all budgets and all governments are being affected by this. How would you compensate for this loss of income? Where should the budget be cut? What would be your priorities?
Thank you, Jay, for that question. I think as we had the opportunity to really look at this correctly, we missed the boat. And what do I mean by that? When the legislature, who I believe is a very good problem-solving legislature, they think ahead. We have a great rainy day fund. We were prepared. They asked the state board to take this on and look at an exercise of where they would cut. Instead, that state board gave that responsibility to the state office, and the state office did their budget cuts, gave it back to the board, which went before the state legislature, I believe, a week ago. And when asked what was the formula, they said we really didn't have a formula. They missed a great opportunity, because I think if they went to the LEAs, the local school districts, and the teachers and said, where can we cut? We could truly have, again, reform in where our spending is. We could have cut in great areas. There are some suggestions, maybe at time I can get into them, but I think we should have done the exercise to get to the local level and find out where we could cut.
You raise an interesting situation here, and it goes to something that I've long been trying to get an answer to. Whenever I meet with a gubernatorial candidate or candidate for the legislature or state board of education or the state superintendent, I always try to find out who is the primary driver of education policy in the state of Utah. And usually everyone wants to say they are. And yet it seems like we have several drivers with their hands on the wheel. I want to ask you, who do you think is the driver of education, and who should be?
Okay, that's excellent. You asked it that way, because there is two answers to that question. Number one, who is it? Well, right now, I believe it's the legislature and the Office of Ed. Who should it be is the State Board of Education. And that's the people's board. That's the board that is elected by the people and represents the people. The state board over the years, because they hire the superintendent of education, and then that superintendent hires the staff, that the staff of the Office of Education have come back to the board and kind of directed them in ways they should go. And then the board goes to the legislature asking for funds or budgets, and they have to plead with them. It should be the opposite. I think the board should be setting what the requirements for education are, and then everyone following suit with that.
Thank you. In his last proposed budget, Governor Herbert recommended that the legislature change the rules to allow him to appoint the members of the State Board of Education. And there has been other legislation proposed in the past that would allow the governor similar type authority. Do you feel that this is a good idea, or should we keep the board entirely elected by the people?
I think it has to be the people's board. I think they have to represent the people. I think this partisan, which this is the first year it's a partisan race, is important, because we truly can have we're supposed to have robust debates that we get in front of people. It's not just whoever has the big special interest or support from groups. I have people supporting me. And so it shouldn't be just who has the most support or money, but we should be able to talk about ideas. We should be able to be in front of the people, and then the people vote on that. I do not believe it should be up to the governor or any other body or entity. It should be the people's board. Thank
you. I want to get back again to the coronavirus. We just completed a few months of the just completed school year, which were different from anything I think any of us have ever experienced, where children were being taught at home. Teachers were being forced to put together online curricula at the spur of the moment without any real guidance. There were some families that didn't have the right type of internet connection, or that had more children in their home than they had computers. It was a different type of experience, and I think it was kind of, the results were mixed, to say the least. Now we have the possibility looming that schools may not open in the fall, or if they do, that they may have to close again if we have a second wave of the coronavirus. I am wondering, how should the Board of Education respond to the need for better online education? And maybe you can also address this need for some families who may not have the proper internet hookups in their homes.
So I think my philosophy, overall philosophy, most of the questions are going to go back to this, that local control. And I believe it's up to the local district, the LEAs, to already be putting together a blueprint of what school year will look like this next year, and different options so parents can see that. They can decide if they're going to opt in or opt out on these opportunities. I feel we've missed the opportunity with being prepared. Some schools were very prepared, some weren't. And so I think we missed that opportunity before, but now we need to know that this is a possibility in the future. So they need to be prepared. But I don't think it's a state school board's decision on what to do, number one. Number two is, again, I don't think it's a state school board responsibility to make sure every child has internet, or every household. There are some great options. We could talk about that maybe later, about those options.
All right, thank you. One more coronavirus question. It disrupted our state mandated assessment tests in Utah. Should these be restored once the pandemic has ended? And do you think they're effective in evaluating success and areas for improvement?
Short answer is no. Could I remain the rest of my time for another answer? But
yeah,
in all seriousness, I think the local local LEAs, if given the opportunities, would do better assessments for less money. I think for a statewide assessment like the end of year high stakes testing, which does not have an effect on the students, it really is judging the teacher and the school, is at best ineffective and at worst very costly to the taxpayer. I think we should eliminate that altogether and not reinstitute it, and allow the local LEAs to have the opportunity to decide what assessments are best. I think we can put oversight on that. That's what our board should be doing, making sure the outcomes are what we're looking for in education, but let the local control decide what those assessments look like.
Kind of a follow-up to that, should parents be allowed to exempt their child from taking this test?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
I think that's an easy answer, right? These end of year high stake testing, again, does not have an effect on the child's grade. I think it's appalling that we let this go. Years ago, somebody smart said, we want to quantify what education is and what it looks like. And you cannot do that. Every child is unique and different. Every school district is unique and different. Every school and every classroom. And for us to say, as an entity, this is what it should look like, I think is just not acceptable. We need to go back to how each teacher and school should look like, left to the parents and the teachers in that district. And so these end of year high stake testings, I think, do no one good.
All right, thank you. As you know, the state board distributes more than $4 billion each year to school districts and charter schools. Tell us what qualifies you to be able to manage this budget, and what accountability measures should the state use to ensure districts and charter schools are using that money appropriately?
So sitting on the state charter school board for 8 years and being chair, I got to see how the federal, state, legislature all works and managing budgets. And so I have that understanding and that knowledge. I also saw how it could be done incorrectly, which that's what I want to work towards now, is making sure it's done correctly. The second part of that question, I think it goes back to, how do we make sure the money is well spent for our taxpayers? They're investing. Many in Southern Utah no longer have children in school, and they're retired, but they still want to invest in making sure that we have a great generation ahead. And so that investment, I think, goes back to the local schools and letting them decide assessments, how that money is spent, overseeing that. And I think as a state, we're supposed to have that oversight on the way the budgets are being spent.
Thank you. What should your relationship as a school board member be with the legislature? How do you envision the legislature working with the State Board of Education, and what would you do to foster that relationship?
So when I was on the state charter school board, charters were not very well liked. Royce can tell you, and many others that I spoke about before, that have been working 20 plus years on bringing choice to Utah. So I had that great opportunity, again, of following these individuals, these true trailblazers, but it wasn't well liked. And when I was chair, we made sure that every month we had a collaborative meeting with all involved, all stakeholders. And we made sure that pride was left outside, politics was left outside, and that whole meeting was meant to be, what can we help children in our state? That's what I would want to get back to, sitting down with all the bodies every month and making sure we discuss what's best for our children in Utah. Are we doing correct for them on the outcomes? If not, we can make direction as a body.
You mentioned charter schools several times. I've written about the proliferation of those in Utah over the last couple of decades. And we had an effort here many years ago to try to get school vouchers, which passed the legislature and then was overturned by a repeal vote by the people. Do we have enough choice in education in Utah? How would you like to see that go?
I don't know if there's ever enough choice. I think there should be opportunities for a robust choice, and I also think that when we're looking at vouchers and we're looking at opportunities, when we started charter, they were supposed to be unique. Over the years, we've tried to make them just like traditional. So I would like to be able to unleash the uniqueness of some charters, the opportunities for true innovative choice, and then parents can choose. And then the market's going to make sure, the free market's going to make sure that good schools, traditional, magnet, homeschooling, all the options that we can think of, will really give full, robust opportunities for education, which makes all education in Utah better. We lift all ships with high tides, and that's what we could do with a robust choice.
Utah has for a long time, educators in Utah have complained that teachers are not paid enough, that it's difficult recruiting teachers, or that they are losing teachers, particularly after 4 or 5 years of service. What could the State Board of Education do to remedy that situation?
So you're absolutely right. In Clark, Nevada, Clark County, Nevada, if a teacher comes in with 3 years experience, they get almost double starting pay with compensation of Southern Utah. So we are exporting teachers after 3, 4, 5 years to Park City, to Clark County, Nevada, which both pay a large amount higher than we do in Southern Utah. I would love to be able to release some money from the budget, quit spending so much on these programs, national programs, and even statewide programs that I think are ineffective, and turn around and make sure that money goes down to the teacher in the classroom. We can raise their salaries, raise their benefits. Right now, we already know they're heroes from what happened in COVID. We need to treat them that way.
Okay. Some of these students in Utah are working out of textbooks that are pretty outdated. We're living in a 21st century world, an online world, as evidenced by what we're doing here this evening. How would you work to modernize education? What do you think the state board's role should be in bringing us into the 21st century?
So I'm going to go back to my belief in this, and that if we allow the local school districts to make changes, instead of issuing statewide mandates that this is the text, or this is the school book, or this is the program they should use, that those local LEAs will end up collaboratively working to increase the technology, increase textbooks, increase all the curriculum that's being taught. I believe working with parents, there should be a curriculum board in every school and maybe every classroom made up of parents and teachers, so that we can discuss where around the nation is curriculum better that we can get here. Maybe the only responsibility of the state board is help to get scale those resources, scale them down so the resources are costly and cost effective in the classroom. So that might be our responsibility.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any questions from a viewing audience. If I could, another question concerning current events. Some of the protests in the last couple of weeks about the role of police officers have mentioned getting police officers out of our schools. Do you think that we need to get rid of these safety resource officers, as some are saying now?
Absolutely not. I think that's absurd personally. And this is personally. I've seen no data that removing resource police officers from the school is a successful program or gives any success to that student or that class or that school district. Just the opposite, where that relationship. There are many horrific events that have been avoided because a resource officer was in the school and built a relationship of trust. If nothing else in society today, we need that relationship of trust boistered to that we make sure we have that relationship. I don't think we should eliminate them. I think we should treat them as heroes because they really are protecting us.
Thank you. You mentioned right at the start that you would like to see reforms as a member of the Board of Education. Can you elaborate on that? What reforms would you like to see most?
So the code out there is Common Core. But you know what, if we replace Common Core with Utah Common Core, is it any different? Or if it's anything, I think the big reform truly is 100 years ago when we educated, it was the local school with parents and teachers. And we were successful back then. Now we have all this modern technology. We have amazing, beautiful campuses. And we're 37th in the world in education out of 71 countries. I think that's ridiculous that we're going downhill quicker now with everything. We spend more money than any country in the world on education. So it's not about money. It's what we're doing with education, and we're nationalizing our education. The reform is remove control from the federal government and even the state government and allow it to flow down to the classroom.
The trend, though, seems to be going in the other direction, particularly when it comes to Washington and what they want to do with local education. So what relationship should the board have with the federal government or the U.S. Department of Education?
So if I had my wish, and I have no control over this, I would love to see the Department of Ed removed, the federal Department of Ed removed. I think even we can scale down drastically the Office of Ed in Utah. I think President Trump, who I support, I believe he's looking to do that and will like to do that. And I applaud him for even thinking about that or saying that out loud. I think we have some governors. I know Representative Hughes, potential governors, Representative Hughes, would also like to see that because I've talked to him in depth about this. So I think our relationship should be same thing we should ask them to do. There's very few things federal government should do. Protect us and make sure that our money, our federal monies are well spent. I think if federal government's involved in Utah, we should not be beat over the head that we have to accept all the curriculum. We should have a choice in what we do and how we handle that.
Thank you. That last question came from one of our viewers, and here's another from a viewer. With increased digital learning, what's your take on protecting student data privacy?
Oh, that's huge. I just listened to a TED Talk a couple of weeks ago. It is scary. Jay, when you and I grew up, luckily there wasn't social media around, that everything we did was then secured somewhere and tracked. Today, literally from pre-birth to the death of our grandchildren, for you and I, and children in school, is being tracked. And I think that's appalling. Especially in our schools, we need to remove that. Any program, especially the ones coming from the federal government, that's tracking, we should have the opportunity to remove it and not have it in our classrooms, our schools, or even in our state.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, there's a question. How can the state board support better civics education? And what is your vision for civics education?
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to tell you a little of my background. When my wife and I came from Pennsylvania, my wife, Anna Marie. And at one point, my wife was worried about education and for our kids. She was always worried, but it got to be where our children walked through a school, a fairly affluent school, through a metal detector with an armed guard there to go in the classroom. Really, it seemed like our kids were preparing themselves to go to prison, if nothing else. And even though that was a pretty good school, there were drug deals that went on the bus in that school. So my wife made an executive decision we were going to homeschool. So for U.S. history, our children had the opportunity to learn the Gettysburg Address, and then we went to Gettysburg and stood on the spot where Abraham Lincoln was and recited it by memory. That's lost in our nation today, that they're trying to rewrite history, rewrite our U.S. history, and children aren't being taught that. And because of they're not taught history, we're doomed to repeat it. And we need to make sure that we are teaching correct history.
Let me follow up on that. How do we ensure that happens? Should there be a state mandate for a certain type of curricula on civics education? How do you get that to happen?
Yeah, you know what I found, if nothing else, by running for this position, is there are parents that are passionate about their children and their children's education. Again, I think we can get almost all issues can be solved by in that local classroom and parents, and leaving the LEAs, local LEAs, to decide that curriculum with the parents. I think we get it back. When we mandate that from a state level, we're giving that opportunity for somebody's opinion on a state level to dictate what goes on down here in Southern Utah. We shouldn't do that. It should be local LEAs, local districts, making sure that's where we generate any of these decisions.
Another viewer has a follow-up to that and says, in that case, do you support the effort to eliminate the civics test that's currently required for high school graduation in Utah?
Yes. Yeah, I think something, if parents really look at some of the questions on that are debatable. If some of the things that were taught in civics today about world cultures and demonizing other world cultures, it's appalling to me as American, as somebody who loves the Constitution. I think that again, if we allow parents in a local school district, those things would be removed. That's not a good indicator if those kids truly know world history, if they know our US history, if they know civics. We'll leave those assessments to the local level, and I guarantee we'll start having a rise in comprehension of those truly important courses.
Another question from a viewer: what's your take on sex education? How should that be approached in the state?
Did they get any more specific with that?
It just says, how should it be approached in the state? Any update?
Okay, because there's a couple the way we have been teaching it, abstinence-based, is something I am for. There is a new modernization, the awoke sex education that they're trying to push on us, that has failed in San Francisco, has failed in New York, but somehow people in Salt Lake feel like it should be successful here. We could see the damage it's done to kids all over the nation, these programs, and yet they still want to push it in here. So I'm absolutely against going beyond abstinence-based type of sex education.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from viewers?
My wife has been writing all those questions though for me, so thank you.
Oh, good. All right.
Just joking.
Yeah, I'm sure. Seeing none, it's time for closing statements. So I will give you 90 seconds to do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That went extremely fast, Jay, and all the Hinckley Institute, the Southern Institute, Royce, the United Way. I want to thank you all for providing me an opportunity. In this short period of time, we truly cannot talk about what education should be and how to change it, how to reform it. That's going to take in-depth discussions. But the way I feel you do it is you build an army. It can't be done on one person. And in that army, we can truly make a change. There are three basic principles that I want to work on to start. Number one, parents, control, and options. 2 is valuing teachers. And 3, stop nationalizing our schools. Let me elaborate. I believe almost all educational issues can be solved by a parent, a student, and a teacher, with vigorous options for parents. Traditional, charter, virtual, homeschooling, magnet schools, parents can choose what's best for their child. Number 2 is valuing teachers and stop excessive spending on administration and to get money down to the classroom to support them. Stopping the exodus of our teachers to outlying areas or even Park City, which spends a lot more on education per teacher with all the compensation. 3, stop nationalizing our education system, things like Common Core and SAGE. Allow districts and schools to decide the best assessments for their schools to show competency. And that's really what we should be looking towards. Not teaching to a test that's forgotten 2 days later, the information, but competency, lifelong learners that truly enjoy learning and are prepared for society. You know, our Office of Ed has tried to adopt programs that have failed in San Francisco and New York and trying to make us become more like them, but we're not like them. It's insanity to elect people, the same people, to the same positions and expect different results. And so with that, my name is Scott Smith. I'm asking for support. Go to my website, the number 4, scottsmith.com, and ask me any question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for your time this evening. We also want to again thank our sponsors, the Hinckley Institute of Politics, KSL, the Sutherland Institute, Utah Association of Charter Schools, and United Way. I also want to thank our viewers for asking questions this evening and want to urge all of you to vote, and not just to vote, but cast an informed vote. And I hope that this evening has helped you along that process. Thank you again, Mr. Smith, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.